Good afternoon and welcome to the latest Straight Up Hangout. I'm Ben Parizek from Barrel Strength Design, and Straight Up Hangouts is a weekly event presented by Barrel Strength Design and Pixel and Tonic. Today it's a pleasure of mine to have with us Travis Gertz from Louder Than 10 and Steve.
Hey!
Steve Adams of Pixel Jitsu. Topic today is don't stop at the system. I got too many notes here. Don't stop at the system, automate, then humanize. And we're going to be talking about expressive design and how we can use craft as a platform to enforce good standards through a publishing workflow. Travis does a lot of work around this and has been working on I guess it's an open source tool for an open source.
It's kind of like a good, I guess, boilerplate, you might call it. I don't know.
Called Live Wires, and we'll be taking a look at that a bit later. To those of you out there, just a quick admin note. We are now using YouTube Live instead of Hangouts on Air, which is being deprecated. So there is now a chat, which you should see if you're on the Straight Up Craft website or the YouTube site. That's where you can ask questions throughout this, and we'll try to monitor that and integrate your questions as we can. And you'll also see, if you're on Straight Up Craft, in the right sidebar there's a Get Involved header, and there's the option to request a topic or volunteer for a code review. If you have any topics you'd like to see us discuss, or if you have any code, twig code, plugin code, even content architecture, and you'd like to have us join us on the show and have Brandon Kelly review your code along with a few of us, please drop us a note. We'd love to hear from you. All right, so don't stop at the system. Travis, let's start off. What is expressive design?
Well, to me, expressive design is basically giving a little bit of extra life to the content that you're publishing. So design, in my mind, has always been sort of how you express information, right? We have text, even text in a book has a little bit of expression in the fonts it uses and how it displays, but then you can kind of scale that up towards something like magazine design or editorial design, where you can play with scale and color and imagery to kind of augment the message of that content. And so for me, expressive design just means looking at whatever's there, whatever's being published, and figuring out how to augment that message and give it a little more impact to people that read it.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I guess one of the challenges we have with this, there's this print and web world, and in the web world we have the challenges that we're often designing systems where the content doesn't exist yet. We're still trying to make things expressive and such. So how do we design for content that doesn't exist and deserves the love it would traditionally get in other mediums like print?
Well, this is something I think I've been thinking about since I started. I built my first website 1 month before I went to school to learn how to design magazines. And so the fun thing there was that magazines kind of have the same thing where you have no idea what the content's going to be, yet you have to build out this system that works, and you have to constantly publish. Every month you might have anywhere from 5 to 20 articles or different pieces of content that have to go in. And they're all very expressive, but you have no idea what they're going to say. So I've always sort of seen that kind of parallel from then and tried to think about how can we sort of learn from that to build systems, not so much copying the design exactly, but how do we kind of take that mindset and apply it on the web. And we've been really we haven't had really great tools for that through the years, right? We've always sort of built CMSs traditionally, like WordPress and things like that, where you kind of have the article template, right? And you just, it's kind of designed to repeat it over and over again because you have small staffs of people that maybe have to write a whole bunch of things, and maybe they're not there's no budget for design, especially back in the early web days, right? It was kind of like the side thing that a lot of companies did. Like the web was sort of like a, I don't know, like a low budget thing that you had to have, and so you'd have like the intern have to write something on the blog, or the
Mhm.
salespeople or whatever, and you didn't really have that kind of budget or focus on it. So we kind of designed these systems just to be able to pump out stuff as quick as possible and generate clicks and whatever else. And so I think a lot of that really dictated how we built the web from way back then up until now. And I think just now, like, I love craft because you can actually it starts to break away from that. And even Days of Expression Engine, that was like the first time I think I started seeing the potential to be like, okay, well maybe we can start thinking about various systems that anticipate variation rather than just like stick us in these like repeatable pieces over and over again.
Yeah, I feel there's been a lot of variations on trying to solve this problem, and there's frequently some level of disconnect between the final product and the variation. So one might be something like wireframes. It's kind of a way that some people have tried to say, hey, let's plan before we plan, to help translate what we're trying to do into what we're going to do. And then in my experience, a lot of those interim solutions, you'll get feedback. Will it relate to the feedback that you get after you start building things out? I don't know, probably not. Um, often it diverges and has a challenge. It creates more challenges in the number of iterations necessary.
Yeah, it's true, totally. I think that's why like the way even we built wireframes in the beginning was sort of, okay, we know we have like a set number of pages, let's do this, and then we'd kind of just color in the lines to make it work when it was done, and then half the time we get the content afterwards and we're like, oh wow, that doesn't work at all with what we thought.
Oh,
Our box is
pagination didn't think of that.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like error messages, all those things that kind of get left by the wayside. And yeah, so I don't know. We've thought a lot about how those kind of early stages get decided, like from the get-go. Like that's another thing that I think you could trace back to editorial design too, is the wireframe. But back in those days, we'd have like a page plan, which would be like kind of like the equivalent of a user flow or like a sitemap where you'd have like, okay, we're going to have a cover here. This is where departments go. This is where the features go in every kind of issue. And then you'd also have wireframes based on closer to like knowing that, okay, we're going to have an interview. What does an interview look like? A feature interview. Or what does a photo essay look like? And so you'd wireframe each type of section dependent on the content. But even then, it's only to kind of get you to a baseline standard. So we could just like be like, okay, we know we need these things for the issue. Let's dump them in. So even if we have no more time to add expression that's going to work out, and we're going to have like somewhat a bit of flexibility that'll work with whatever we're doing, instead of the other way around where I think on the web we kind of like have, okay, this is your box that you get this. You have to write a piece of content that fits in here. And so this is what you get. And so I think it started off really where we had to do that out of necessity, right? Like the way we designed was in a Photoshop document, and it was a fixed width, and we'd have fixed boxes, and then the CMSs kind of had to work with that too. You'd have one giant text field for your content, and so it all had to kind of fit in there. Maybe you could have an inline image or something, but as we got responsive,
Yeah, now you see something in Photoshop and you're like, is that a certain width, or is that full width, or what assumptions do I need to make here?
Yeah, the wireframes, they don't really make sense anymore in the traditional way, and even prototyping, knowing how to prototype for different pieces to come in, that's a challenge too. So we've been doing a lot of thinking around how to do that. Sorry, excuse the sirens.
We know it's not for you.
No, not this time.
So then let's. Did you have something to say, Steve?
Yeah, I think a lot of these issues come from the transition from print design to web design. a lot of the print designers try to make the web print and don't account for interactivity and attention spans and the medium at all. I started as a print designer, and we always would start with our communication goals. And I know that's a real radical idea to focus in on the content first and see what's important to say and what you want to accomplish with just the content. But it seems like everything else sort of came after that, and the web was sort of like mop-up for the print content. I think that a lot of the problems that you have stem from treating the medium like it's print and not considering the proper audience and things like communication goals and proper planning. If you want to create a system that's adaptable for any circumstance, a content editor is not the same as a news editor, like an editorial editor. I think we need to treat these things differently and actually, have smarter, better content to start with.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it, right? Like and especially like when we were kind of like trying to transition these print things to the web, a lot of it was kind of like taking the exact process of like, I want to map out, I have this page width, I want to map out exactly what's on it, and that was kind of it. And then we, with no attention to like that content process of like, you're exactly right, like that content strategy and content first, and what a novel concept.
Right. Even the concept of something being above the fold on the web is like a print term,
Yeah.
We've started using a tool called Hotjar that gives you kind of a heat map of the scroll on the page, and it's really interesting because you'll see 75% of your users don't go past a certain point, or you'll kind of see how people are scrolling on your page, which can really inform what part of your inform you on what part of your design's being seen or how you're adapting your content there. But
yeah, it's interesting. Like I think a big part of I think it's been good in the last few years with sites becoming not just responsive but fluid a lot more, right? They're just we're understanding how to build systems more than just artifacts that we paste, or like pages.
Less verbose.
Systems. Yeah, exactly. So trying to reuse components instead of templates, that kind of thing, I think gets us closer to something where we can start to kind of get a system that has potential for expression to sit on top of it, rather than trying to sort of inject it from the baseline of it and build it upwards, if that makes sense. So
yeah. Well, so let's keep going that direction. So how do tools like Craft help us get a baseline system like this to handle this type of variation in content?
I think on a number of levels, like there's so many good things with the approach to not only Craft, like it's been happening for years slowly. I think certain pieces, right? We've got Craft in particular is great because of its flexibility, first of all, in making templates and things like the matrix field, and being able to pretty much construct a page on the fly with different modules and components and things like that. So we can sort of assemble pages like Lego blocks and sort of have a library of elements we can use instead of just thinking in the page, and we can reuse those across the site. So that's one of the things. So you have that system to really play around with and almost emulate, I guess, art direction and flexibility. Maybe not element. It's like a synthetic sort of expression on there, which is great. And then you have the fields, right? The sheer flexibility with all the different field types and the configurability of all those things. And then,
I've got.
I think we lost him.
Yeah, I'm okay. Travis, we may have lost you. Oh,
Oh,
you there?
do you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you, but you cut out half a minute ago or more.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, you were on field types when you dropped out.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay,
So
you're back.
yeah, you can hear me. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. So yeah, I was just mentioning Anthony Colangelo's Summit or Twig components and things like that. It just blew my mind about how flexible and reusable your Twig build systems that are really flexible, as well as just simple things like the way like Brandon and the team really stuff you're doing while you're editing, and they're just all kinds of little touches that make it for adding kind of another layer of expression on top of things, on top of just a standard system.
I find it's that consistency that you just know whenever you're interacting with a particular field, whether it's on an entry or a user or whatever, you're interacting with it as you would expect it would be. And when you start to have consistency like that across the content fields you're using as well as the content elements, the different types of elements, the reusability of what you're doing goes up a lot.
Yeah, like this is a currency field, so you don't have to worry about decimal places. That was one of the things that I really liked about going from other systems to Craft was the field types and being able to assign content that was properly formatted. I don't really use a lot of WYSIWYG fields. Headline is a plain text field. Most of the stuff that I do is like your leader is going to be plain text, that kind of thing. It keeps clients from making everything, 48-point pink Comic Sans instead of, what you designed the site to look like. So that was another benefit of Craft, I think, is how easy it is to keep the branding of the site on target.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's nice. Like I love being able to really control how just how much a client and some of our clients are very savvy designers, and we trust them and we give them like a full range of what you can kind of do in there. And then others were like, you can use 2 colors for your background and that's it. But it gives them, a little bit of expression that they normally couldn't do maybe on their old site, right? But it's just, and then being able to train them slowly into like, okay, if you want maybe these types of articles or posts or whatever, or pages, you do this color, and this for these you don't. And we can make rules with them and start getting them more kind of starting to think a little bit more about the importance of producing content that I think deserves more expression as well. Like it kind of goes hand in hand sometimes, we find, is like, there's so many times where you just get this mentality of dumping in like 10 blog posts just to sell your product, and no one really cares about it. They just do it to sell your garbage, right? And so when you kind of give people a little bit more power to add something to it, they tend to care more about what they're writing, or sometimes it goes the other way too, where they just care about their writing more, so it deserves a little more attention. And if there are people that are a little more visual savvy, then we like to give them a little bit extra control over that stuff.
Yeah, how do we approach this? Yeah, how do you think of the different types of users and what level of complexity you're giving them? When you're setting these systems up for organizations, are you thinking about the development firm, or are you thinking about the organization of content editors, or how are we approaching that problem?
Well, we're lucky in that a lot of our business is we actually consult with a lot of design agencies or studios with designers internally, and so we have and we consult on their process as well. So a lot of times we'll just advise that they do bring in a designer. I'm just going to turn off my camera, I think, just so it's a little more clear here. But yeah, so we'll try and gauge based on their experience. Some of our clients, they're very savvy with code, so we'll add in like a custom, like a little text field that allows them to dump in some custom CSS. And then other times they're maybe they're a marketing person that kind of knows their brand guidelines and wants to be able to make some adjustments to, choosing between the two brand typefaces for their headlines or something, or using like different brand colors as a background color for a header or something like that. And so we kind of work closely with them to, number one, help them set up a team that will work with the website in a way dependent on their goals, and then other times it's just just knowing just being very aware of their budget and their skills, and so we will work with them and do training, of course, everything like that. But usually we err on locking it down quite a bit, and then often they come back to us when they're ready to kind of like take it up a level. Maybe they want to add a few more modules, or maybe they just want more control over their like a banner image or something like that. Then we can kind of like turn up the dial a little bit.
Yeah, it's always better to lock it down. I mean, we've all had that client who wants to say absolutely everything because they think that if they don't say the one thing, then suddenly they're going to miss out on all this business because they didn't, describe every possible thing about their product or service. A lot of those decisions originally will be, based on interactions with the client. Like if I have an overly verbose content brief, I'll instantly set content limits in the fields where you're limited to a character or word length in the field, and that forces them to keep on topic without rambling on and on and on about every possible attribute related to what they think that they should say. But I'm with you. It's better to be conservative and limit them in the beginning of things, and to slowly open it up if they want to expand beyond that, if they can be trusted to do it without destroying a site you spent so much time developing for them.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like, lock it down by default, and then sometimes we'll let them have like one matrix block. That's it, where they can just like change one background color, and that's cool. But I think it's just for us, that's just something we try and build into all our sites. Is like, even if it's the smallest piece of customization that they can do to kind of pump up a piece of content, that's usually a nice thing for us. A lot of times too, it comes back later when they do maybe expand their team and they do have someone a little more savvy on there. Then we can always kind of work with them and make it a little more powerful. But yeah.
So, Travis, how are you? I think this is a great approach, and we use it too to some degree. However, I feel I see a lot of people out there, small shops and even larger shops, where clients are demanding and they feel they're not getting their money's worth if you're not making everything editable for them. They want the nav to be completely editable. They want, if it's an option, just enable it, because I don't want to come back and pay you for the next round of updates. I just want that there, and I'll figure it out later. I think this is an attitude you get from several types of clients. What is your recommendation on communicating, the value of unlocking things slowly, in particular with this discussion with a client who is resistant to the idea of having less options?
That's a good question. I think it largely depends on the client, but yeah, we do get that every now and then where we sort of put in a few things in place. If they really want it, we will let them have it, but with the caveat that once we hand this over to you guys, it's if anything breaks, we can fix it, but we're charging for that.
There's a $500 incident fee.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like you just, you put the warnings out, and you can, we try and educate them as much as possible. It's like every other thing in this kind of business, right? It's half of the job is education and guiding the hand and sort of helping them make good decisions, and sometimes you gotta kind of give them the warning and be like, okay, well, here it is. Take a snapshot of whatever you got, and try and get them to, at least, give them the warning, show them the limits of what you can and can't do. I mean, sometimes too, like if we know it ahead of time, we can just build those custom fields and just make them very verbose, right? Like, yep, you can change these variables, but the text field, and there's no formatting on it or anything like that. But
generally, when you use entry versioning.
Oh yeah. Entry versioning is always a good thing.
I think that helps the rollback factor, but it doesn't necessarily help the conversation with the client of what a preferred limit on your end is that might be different than a preferred limit on their end. And I think, Travis, you're right in saying I think a lot of times we skip this education step, that clients are experts in what they do, not what we do, and we're experts what we do, and the challenge of any relationship is establishing trust and treating each other as experts and trusting that the recommendations coming through have validity. And oftentimes that takes time to pause and say, hey, before we just do this, let me talk you through it, explain why we want to do it this way. And I like that idea of you raise the barrier of entry to just make a simple request. So if it's a reasonable request, you say yes and keep moving. If it's a complex request, you're like, let's have an hour-long meeting about that. And then they just try to start avoiding hour-long meetings and going with your things you say yes to real quick.
Yeah, well, a big part of it, like we always talk about this with project management and things like that, is, like there's this story Rachel, my partner, always likes to tell, and it's about like this. They did this study with schools, right, where when you have a school with no fences around the schoolyard, the kids generally like stick close to where they are, right? They stay close to the school and they don't venture out into the playground. But as soon as you put the fences in and the boundaries, they play all over the field, right? They go and they use the entire space because it's like they know where the boundary ends. And so with us, we like to think about that with our clients a lot of times, and just like from the start, like setting up those safe boundaries. And it's not to put limits on what they can do or anything like that necessarily, but it's just so they know how far they can go at all times, and when you do get a request, then they know that it's, this is something outside of what we originally agreed on in our project, and so that it kind of opens up the world for like things like change requests and increasing scope in a phased approach where we can charge for what it's worth and not just adding things onto the project. And so it's sort of like, it's like you were saying too, like if as soon as you start saying like, yes, this sounds great, let's see how this affects our budget, let's see how this affects like the boundary, and they start to understand over time. By like the third time you go, let's see how this affects the time and the budget, they go, okay, either they'll start quoting that back to you and be like, I don't care what it costs, let's do it, that kind of thing, or whatever it is. And then that can be kind of a nice, helpful way to get through that too, we find.
So how do you set scope initially when you're dealing with clients? One thing I'll do is I'll have a content outline that describes pretty much all the different types of content in the site. This is a biography, there's a photo, there's links to colleges, that kind of thing. And then from that I'll determine content types, entry types, and then the number of fields that are going to be required to develop the site. I'm curious how you approach that and how you set scope from the beginning to limit that kind of creep that you're talking about.
Yeah, we do a number of things. Typically, we will do like an early research phase or a discovery phase where we can actually spend some time and really get a deep understanding of not only the content that already exists, but sort of where we want to go through it. And typically with our shop, we actually try to bring the content in-house as much as possible. And so just because even if a client has some kind of content, or they're good at writing, they're not necessarily good for setting up structured content for a CMS, or for the web in general, or taking in like search engine stuff into their into account. And so we try and do that and work that into our prices as well. And then so we kind of have like the more we kind of can control that and we can see it, we also sort of do like that content inventory, and we'll work with whoever's going to be building the craft stuff out, whether it's myself or someone else that we've partnered with to build it out. We'll kind of make sure that they're involved in that research phase, and they can start scoping out those content pieces just like that. And we'll kind of like the only difference we do is we don't typically estimate in hours or anything like that. We estimate in half-day chunks, and so and then even then we have like a more of a sprint rate type of thing. So like we'll charge like a 2-week rate, and then we'll just kind of like get a rough idea of how many blocks of time are in that we're going to need to like set up the system, kind of build out the templates and all that. And so we can kind of get, sometimes it'll go over a little bit, sometimes it'll go under, but we find like over a couple weeks, you kind of have that flexibility, and everyone's getting paid, and we know how much we have to pay out people and everything else like that. So if we can tie it to time and scope, and we lock that down and have a good scope of work document at the beginning, we can usually keep on top of it. But it's project management. Like it's a hard skill, and just having like that dedicated project manager on the team for us helps us. Like every sprint we make sure we're on time and everything's looking good, and we give like a weekly update to the client and make sure that's good. If something creeps in, the second someone starts to mention, hey, can we do this, can we do that, that's like a red flag for us all of a sudden that there might be a change in scope that's happening. And so we have to discuss that and figure out what are the implications behind that. So it's kind of like research phase at the beginning, and then just constant check-ins as we go through the project.
Yeah, Travis, Andrew Welch from NY Studio 107 here. I think that you make a great point that the discovery phase is incredibly important. I mean, there are times that I haven't spent a ton of time doing that, and inevitably those are the projects that I get absolutely railed on. Because if you don't know exactly what you're dealing with going into it, it's really, really tough to do any kind of an estimate in terms of what is going on. So a question I had for you is, do you then charge your clients for the discovery phase? Because I've had some pushback on occasion where they say, wait a minute, you're going to charge me just to find out how much you're going to charge me?
Yeah, that's always that's a fun one that we've had to work hard to figure out how do you have that conversation. But yeah, we definitely do charge that. We've moved away from calling it the discovery phase and just kind of call it a research phase. And the biggest thing for us is, and I think it's with any big project, it's like you say, it's like how can we, like it's not so we know how much to charge them, it's so we know that we're building the right thing for you to begin with, right? A lot of times, because we're doing design and content as well, it's sometimes a little bit easier, I think, for us to do the whole project when we can be like, well, maybe you don't need a blog on your website at all, or maybe, you can start to have those conversations that maybe, they didn't think of before they hired you, but after you might, sometimes you can save them money, or you can kind of prioritize what's important in a little different way. And so it's kind of having those conversations for us is really important. Again, it's that education component is just so critical, right?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I've had it where a client just wants some minor work done, and I do a little bit of investigation, and it looks like no problem. And then part of the way into it, they're on GoDaddy shared hosting, and you can't, you try to upgrade to a new CMS, and it breaks because their hosting doesn't handle it. And then you get into, well, we got to move you to a new hosting provider. You've got to do sysadmin work, getting everything set up and working, and then it just goes way, way over budget. And I just think it's real. It may be basic, and maybe everyone knows this, but I think it is super critical to do that discovery in the beginning, so that the estimate that you give your client and the amount of work that you think you're going to need to be able to do is actually accurate. And if you don't do that kind of due diligence up front, I mean, it can really bite you in the ass, or at least it has me.
Contractually, how many deliverables do you have? Do you have just one deliverable, Andrew, and that's the final product?
No, typically I do it in phases.
Right.
Where I'll have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3,
Right.
and I consider each phase to be a deliverable.
Right. And so you can back out of the, that's the way I do it. So you have the planning phase, and then if you don't want to continue on to the development part, then fine.
Yeah.
I think any relationship can be renegotiated. So I think sometimes people kind of, especially web developers and designer types, sometimes like once you start down that path, your OCD just makes you want to complete it regardless of how the budget's adjusting along the way. And now and then it just makes sense to throw your hands up and be like, hey, like I made a mistake, and this is like, if I'm going to complete this for you, I'm going to be paying for it by the end of this, and I'd rather give you your money back and just eat what we've already eaten. And it's a hard conversation, and you got to be respectful through it, because you have tried to lead somebody down a path that you thought could work at one point. But I think it's an option that needs to be considered more often than it is in our industry.
And,
right.
And something I'm trying to get better at, and I'd be interested in Travis's thoughts on this, but the projects that have ended up being just an absolute nightmare, both for me and probably for the client, are ones that are either I'm doing someone a favor, like a friend of mine or a colleague or something. Oh, sure, yeah, I'll help you out. Can't be possibly that bad, right? Or something that whether it's because they're a friend or a colleague, or just they only have so much money to allocate for it, or it's the projects that I've severely underbid on them, and then I have problems putting in the time to do the work, because it's going to take a ton more time than I thought it would to do this thing. Client isn't going to be happy if they're billed more, and I also have other clients that have paying jobs that need to be done, and I've kind of gotten myself into that corner where the really low-ball jobs that I have taken end up being the absolute worst, because it's tough to allocate the time for it, because I'm being severely underbilled when I am working on them. And then obviously the client's not happy either. You said you would do this. And I'm curious if you've ever kind of run into that. I've run into that a few times, and I'm trying to never run into it again, because it's just been horrible.
Travis, if you have a thought on that, please answer, but I'm going to try to get us back on the topic of expressive design after your answer.
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think it's, I love talking about this stuff too. Like, we have, of course, been, I think probably all of us have had some flavor of that situation before. And yeah, it's like one of those things where experience is like a huge thing, right? Like you said, it's that you're trying to fight like hell for that research phase. It's just so critical. And it's not just for us, so we know that we're going to be covered, right? It's for the client as well. The client, that's no fun for the client to be like, hey, when's my site done? And to know that we loathe working on it because we're not getting paid, that's not good for anybody. So I think you're right. Like, it's just, you
just got to say no, right?
You got to say no, yeah.
That's what I've run into. Is there have been some jobs that I wanted to take, and I'd be like, well, there isn't a lot of money here. I'll do it in my spare time, and then I never end up having that extra spare time, and then the client is unhappy too. And I guess the answer is just say no, right?
Yeah, the answer for us, like, there's times we'll send them to Squarespace or something like that, and be like, look, this is be the best option for you. right now, and sometimes it is.
Get us back on the rails, Ben. Sorry.
So,
Yeah.
no, yeah, these are always fun conversations, but we'll have to do another hangout on this topic. Travis, so you have a boilerplate to start down this path of creating a framework around more expressive design. Would you like to give us a demo of Livewires and what you're doing with Livewires in Craft?
Yeah, sure. Here, I'll share my screen. Hopefully that this connection holds up here. But yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of a background on where I came from and all this, because it is an amalgamation of, where is this? Okay, of like years and years of troubles and learning and lots of other smart people's ideas being amalgamated into this. And so, can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, so Livewire started, let's see, we built this in around, I guess, 2012, like a few years ago. And it was when we were working with EngineWorks on some projects, and we were partnering, like one of me and this UX designer were working together on a project. He's an awesome UX designer, but he was prototyping, but his prototypes were really high fidelity. And when it came to doing kind of more UI design, which is the role I was taking on, I was like, wow, this is already kind of like done. I'm just going to be changing colors. And we found we were having lots of troubles, like how do we prototype this app properly without stepping on each other's toes, without communicating something really high fidelity to the client. And so we kind of just started off like, let's just make an HTML like CSS boilerplate so we could prototype in the browser and give the developers something to work with right away. And so we just started off with like just a like super plain set of CSS styles, like what you're seeing on here. And so we'd have like, okay, here's placeholders and stuff. We'll have like some chunks of content that we can lay in here. It's going to be obvious that it's not, oh yeah, and we added this little feature here to like blank out the text. So we could show the client this. They're not going to be hung up on what the text says, but we can still work with real content. And so my partner Rachel, she would write the content, and then I'd dump it into like some static HTML templates, and then we just like lay out these big chunks, and then we'd hand it over to a developer. And so we kind of really liked how this worked, because we could show off this thing. It was really fast and easy for us to produce, but it was easy to share with the client. It was responsive. They could just look at it on their phone in any browser. Didn't matter. So it was like, wow, this is super easy for us to prototype in. And because at the time, I think the alternative was like My Balsamic or something like that. And so with those, we found a couple problems. One, it wasn't responsive. Two, it took a long time, and we had to throw away the prototype after we were done with it. And three, the clients often thought it was the design, and they'd be like, oh, I don't want this Comic Sans all over my website. What is this? And so this was sort of the attempt to kind of assuage all those concerns and address them. And so we found that it was actually a good starting point for production HTML and CSS. So then the second part of it was, well, let's make like a style guide to kind of go with it, that we can just sort of like start styling elements. It's much like the kind of atomic design stuff. Like we made this almost at the same time as Brad Frost was making that stuff, which was awesome, right? Everyone was thinking about like, hey, let's make just a whole library of like form fields and headings and things like that. And so we found, okay, well, on one branch we can start designing the prototype in HTML, and then on the other we can start building the CSS in this thing. And then when we just combine the branches, merge the branches, we have something that actually looks like a really bad but rough version of the site that we can start working with. And so we kind of did this for years, trying to figuring out like, okay, like how do we automate different parts of this? Like how can, you know, we were working with Expression Engine, and so we'd be like, well, it'd be really nice to have like the content strategist be able to define the fields, rather than just the developer. But then that's going to totally screw up the code we have to do, and who knows if this is going to work. And so we tried some experiments, and it was always a bit cumbersome through the years. And then Craft came along, and that was like, oh wow! All of a sudden, like, we've got the live preview, we've got these really flexible fields, and so we started to experiment with it on our own website on Louder Than 10 when we use that. And so we were able to kind of play a little more with, like, okay, we had these sort of like prototype styles in here for like the grid systems, and we sort of like got more of these like components kind of made up, and we started thinking like, well, what if we started adding just like, if we can just manipulate the classes on these divs, then we can kind of start moving things around, like adding positioning, you know, maybe toying with colored backgrounds, things like that. And so the way we started out was with a matrix field, which is not in here. Actually, yeah, I still have the old matrix field. So this is our website right now. And we would have like, okay, let's make a row section here on the side, and then let's, you know, give it some possibilities for different background colors. And so that kind of worked for a while. And so it was just sort of like, how do we combine this and make it controllable from the CMS side? And so, like, fast forward a couple years, you know, we started, like, just this year, I think that the thing that changed everything for us was this Neo plugin that Benjamin Fleming made, where it's like the Matrix on cocaine or something like that. It just, like, blows everything up. And so it's like a matrix field, except you can reuse your fields, you can nest blocks, and you can duplicate. So you have like these three things that just add so much power to it. So it allowed us to kind of like look at our Livewires prototype and be like, oh, if we can do all that, maybe we can start making some art direction sort of fields in here. And so we'd start off experimenting really lightly, like, let's see. Stop me if I'm going too fast here or anything, but
a few in the audience are mentioning they cannot see your screen, Travis. So would you mind unsharing and resharing and see if that?
Yes, for sure. What I might do, actually, do you guys think it makes sense for me to disconnect and reconnect?
I don't know. Is anybody out there in the audience? Are you seeing videos of everybody else?
I'm seeing the screen fine.
Maybe just try to reconnect. I think internally we're seeing everything. Or I mean, try to reshare your screen and let's see if we can.
Sure. Let's try this again here. Okay.
Okay.
So,
yeah. People are saying they can see it now.
Okay. Cool. So, like, it was this sort of idea of Livewires, and then recently also these sort of ideas of things like immutable CSS styles. Like, there's some great libraries out there like Base CSS and Tachyons, where they have they kind of designed it for React components, where you have like these utility classes that sort of define like margins, and grid styles and things like that, but they're like single-use CSS classes. And so we've sort of combined that idea into Livewires, combined with some field magic here to sort of just add like a component library. So I'm going to remove the art direction field on this. So for example, this is how a page might look like in the most complex example that we usually start with for prototyping purposes. And so this uses the Neo field here. And so we start with, I'll just make a whole new thing here. Basically, you can have a section, a divider, an image, video at the top level. And so we'll make a section. And what a section is, it's just like a block on the page. And so if I make this subtle, it just like creates a block on the right. And then within it, I can say, oh, I want maybe some text or a button or an image or a video. And so we, like I said, we have tons of things just because that's, especially for prototyping internally, no client's going to see this up front. And we can, it's easier to scale back, we find. So, and then we'll go like, love Markdown, so we'll just put Markdown and everything in here. And I'll just paste some text in here. And so we kind of like dump our text in here. And then we started going, okay, well, we can do that pretty nice and easy. But what if we started like adding some layout things in here? And so I do a drop down with some like width, like column widths in here. So like I want this to be 2/3 of the screen. And so I'll put that in there. Maybe we want to float it to the right or change the text alignment on it. And then, you know, after that, we want to maybe add an image. And so then for prototyping purposes, we've kind of added these things here. So we can use like that placeholder image service, and we can just go, I want this to be big ol' image. And it's going to like make one of these things. We're going to put some placeholder text over it. And of course, because that's a really not useful position, we can kind of go, we want this to be 1/3, and then that'll float it to the right. And then all of a sudden we can start like playing around with really unique layouts, and we're not just limited to, hey, I want to do the big header with the 3 subcolumns, things like that. And so for us, like in this sort of prototyping phase, it's just invaluable to be able to explore different ideas really quickly, right? And we just internally use this. Even if we have to throw this away, we can kind of, this is something we can show the client really quickly, and you hopefully not throw it away, but maybe dial it back at times. And so, you know, we've even got things like forms in here. So I'll make the form like, give it a background here. I'm not going to put in text right now. We'll put in like a text field and call it name. And then we've got like some other things here, what we want the field value to be, and you know, placeholder things that we always forget to put in, right? Like, oh yeah, what's that got to be? And then make it required. All that fun stuff. And so for us, it allows us to really have like some really fun, flexible systems, basically, on top of whatever like base system we've built. So like if you can imagine this on top of a style guide already, like we'll have the basics, like what fonts we're using. We'll limit the color palette to in these kind of drop downs here. Maybe there's like 4 brand colors that they can choose from, that kind of thing. And so that's sort of like the gist of it. And then for showing clients, we have that feature. It's just a global switch where we just transform this to like gray lines, so you can kind of like show them roughly the structure of the page without it getting too complex, so they don't get hung up on the text. So that's sort of our approach to this. And then like to take it even further, once we have like a system made, we have like these art direction pieces here. And this actually starts adding in some inline CSS to the page, but it's really only designed to be like page-specific stuff. And this is for obviously only clients that can handle this. So we have things where if you look up at, keep an eye on the heading there, we can sort of change between the serif font or the sans, and then we have like a type scale that we can sort of use in there, and then some fonts, and then maybe we can play with colors as well. Like let's make the header background color blue, and then you know, we can start actually building on top of this stuff. Throw in like, see if I've got an, oh, I don't have any images in here, but let's see if we can pop one in. but it just gives us like a really flexible way to really have fun and experiment with different pieces and components, and just pretty much use this as though it were like a really controlled design environment.
So how much, when you're designing a site from scratch, are you first styling the style guide and then coming to this step, or are you first building out this in kind of a monochrome, like organizational way, and then moving on to the design after that?
Well, I can show you an example of a site we're working on right now, actually. So on one branch, like we'll go on a subdomain and we'll do like me and our other partner, Anna, who lives in Calgary. She's another designer. She's awesome. So I'm working on the prototype for this particular project. And so I've laid all this out and put some forms in and things like that. And then on another branch, she was working on the UI library. So she's designing these things first. And so like we're putting in brand colors. She's styling up the elements, what the headings look like, what the paragraphs look like, all of those things. And then what we finally did at the end of that is we actually, combined those into one. And then it's once we get that system, we can start like playing around and start like, this one's really early in the process of it, so you guys are seeing kind of behind the the preview of what we're still working on here. But you know, we kind of have those styles we can lean on to start with, and so we want to keep the art direction as minimal as possible on every page. So like to bring it to our own like personal site here, here's an example of like a fresh article that we want it to kind of look like this to begin with. This is just our default styles based on what we've made for our initial design system, all our global styles. And so with this, we want to, for example, turn it into something closer to this, where we have a lot more, it's just very specific to this article. Obviously on our site, we go like, our brand is louder than Jan. We push this stuff like crazy, probably more than makes sense for most people, but you know, we have like our different colors here. We'll add in like some custom CSS to address like different parts of the headings and stuff like that. And then we just like to have fun with it. All our pages have different components that are very specialized to this type of layout. But for us, you know, this is like an extreme version of sort of what you can do with it, and just the layout flexibility. It just allows you to break out of the standard stuff and kind of use it's like automating the right parts so you can add expression on top of that stuff for very little effort, right? Minimal code, but also having some control of how that works. Does that make sense, you guys? Is this like...
So you're using this like a rapid prototyper, and then are you actually keeping the system in production, or are you just defining the styles that end up in production?
Usually we like to think about it as a very progressive thing when possible, so we try to use as much as possible from the prototyping stage and kind of build it and refine it and make it kind of more customized as we go. You know, obviously this isn't going to address every single page and every single client. And other times we'll, you know, like we were discussing earlier in the conversation, we'll want to lock this down a lot, right? And so,
right. How are you handling like stuff that needs to be developed, like news brief pages or anything that's not just a single entry page?
Oh yeah, so I don't know if I have any parts live with this, but this is another, I'm going to show my screen again here, but like there's been, oh man, I love the craft community so much. They make some great plugins for this stuff. But let me just see. There is a wonderful field type called listing section from Trevor Davis. And so we'll use this, and we're still experimenting with this one a little bit because it's a little bit scary, but basically it allows us to pull in any sort of section entry. And so I've got like an entry listing block in here in which I'll have like a little piece of text that can go above it, but then we can choose like maybe you have a news feed in here and you can put your limit in. And then on the code side, we would just define what actually goes in that block. It kind of requires a little more, sorry, trying to find my window here, a little more refinement for sure. And that's where most of our development nowadays comes in, where we'll start with this as sort of like baseline. This is like our boilerplate craft install, and then everything we do on top of it is it's either filtering down to a simpler system or refining what's actually in those blocks. And so we're trying to really think on that component level of like, okay, what are we gonna
do you use standard routing, or are you just doing everything through the index? Because what I'll do that I found works really well is I'll actually create a template include block. So if I want to like have some more complicated, elements on a page that really wouldn't be something that you would enter into a matrix, I have a matrix block where I can just include the source code for that, and that way I can stick, a news entry in the middle of a page or that kind of thing without having to worry about any of the regular craft routing.
Oh, that's a great idea. That would be that'd be super helpful. There are certain things. Oh man, you guys, this is
like a lawyer site where they have like lawyers by department. I'll have just a little parcel that pulls the lawyers based on their category and displays their headshots. So instead of creating a whole complicated folder structure and template structure for the lawyers' pages, I'll just include that block, and then it just knows it's just coded to do it, and then that way I don't have to worry about routing or anything.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, you guys, I'm like, this is such like early days stuff for me, and like just still such a like experiment on our end. But like, there's so many ways that I think this could be better and improved and things like that, and made simpler. Like, there's a few issues that we find with with the Neo field, especially. Like, it's so powerful, but at the same time, it gets complex really quickly, as I'm sure you can imagine. Like, we have, like, on that lawyer site, we have, like, you have a section, and then within there you have a form. Within that you have fields. We even have a call-out field within it that could have its own text in it. Like, it's super crazy after a while, and like trying to really use tabs and everything to make it happen. But that's sort of stuff that would be interesting to look at. Like, what are some different ways you could perhaps either select elements from the UI or be able to find those things easier? That kind of stuff is always interesting to me. On the same token, having like I wish I was a plugin developer and could make these things myself, but like so you guys, if you want to do some cool plugins, I'd love this. But like some cool art direction, like field types and stuff like that, where maybe instead of like the color field, it's like, how can I have a swatch where I can just like pick things, or like
you can't choose from 16 million colors. You only get 16.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of stuff. Like, I'd love to be able to kind of think of new ways to sort of have a really good palette that's not just a matrix field of like things that I gotta put in there.
What I want is granular field positions, permissions, so I can set like a content editor doesn't get these fields, but the site administrator can. So they could go and set like styles for an entire section within an entry without having to worry about the content guide changing it every single time.
Yeah.
And you really need that, because what Travis was talking about before was, they're essentially using this tool as a way to prototype their designs, because you can't just take this whole content building system and deliver it to the client and be like, here you go,
they'll break it the first time they use it.
Well, it'll be too complicated for a lot of what they need to do, and then also it unfortunately kind of gives them the ability to turn your wonderful design into horrible, horrible stuff. Where if you did have the, you could show different fields based on the user level, that would sidestep that, and the person actually entering the content would only be able to do, X, Y, and Z, and then you could take your whole wonderful Wix built with Craft backend and use that in prototyping as well as delivering it to the client. Assuming that you work out some of the other issues with it.
The CEO's wife really likes paint. Pink. Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing is like maybe sometimes you could give them like a little piece of the site that just can do pink, but it's controlled, right? So that's a cool possibility sometimes. But yeah, like you're absolutely right. Like one way we've thought of like, and I don't know if this will work because we haven't tried it yet, but like using a plugin like Control Panel CSS to like throw display none on the tabs on the Neo field or something. I don't know if the Neo field has the hooks. No, it's like a total like. I guess we could do this.
No, I mean,
it'll break. All your sites will be down. One update will happen, and you'll be like, "Oh my God! All my clients call me."
It's not so much that; it's just it's what I think. God, why am I blanking on his name? Patrick has said a number of times is that if it feels like a hack when you're doing it, it probably is, right? And you should just step away from the keyboard and not do it.
Right.
So let me ask this challenge. I think it's a challenging question. You mentioned, Travis, how this is very experimental at this phase, and it's also very complex. You've got multiple levels of things going on there, from content to styles to adjustments and all of that. How do you plan sites so that as your own philosophy changes over time, how do you think about going back and updating old sites, or how do you think about what you're getting your client into, and if they ever need to pivot and go a different direction, do you feel going this approach has trade-offs that are worth considering, or is it really, I feel at one level I get really excited and I'm like, we finally have the control we've always wanted over this, and then on the other level we migrate websites, and I couldn't imagine getting something like you showed me as a database asking me to migrate it over to another platform and saying like, oh, don't worry, that's going to be an easy one. Like,
yeah, there is a certain level of commitment you for sure have to take with this. And yeah, it does come down to sort of needs and things like that, and it comes in with like a very big sort of banking that hopefully the thing that you are moving on to next does have some sort of flexibility. Yeah, migration for this would be tricky. Right. At the same time, like we've also done, like, because the wonderful flexibility of Twig and templating and everything like that, a lot of this stuff, like with our own site especially, we have to make sure this stuff works in an RSS feed, right? And those kinds of things. And so we do have like simplified down matrix blocks as well. Like we usually do 2 versions. We'll have like the full art directable thing where you can like insert the classes, and then we have another one where it just takes the content field, the bare minimum part, and pulls it in. And so you kind of have to think about the future in that way, right? So and like how's this stuff going to work in
the cost of the implementation is the investment the cost of the design implementation is kind of the investment you're considering. You're still capturing the data in a reusable way, and if you were migrating away, you might have to rethink how you're putting a skin over that data.
To answer that question, yeah, and I've run into that myself where, oh my God, I did all this a different way on this other site. What helped me was once I started modularizing everything, right? So for every block, I have a separate parcel for that block. And there's a matching twig include for that block. So instead of matching SAS file for that block. So instead of one giant style, every block has its own SAS file, and every block has its own twig file. And that way I can, work on just that one component, and then as things shift from site to site, I'm not actually going through a ton of source code to try to find the styles for the block that's mixed in with all the other stuff. And if you keep everything in its own little compartment, it makes it so much easier to go back and upgrade a previous client, because you have a client that may not be using all those block types. That's what I found.
Yeah, I agree. Like, being modular is critical for this kind of stuff, especially it's just, it's so nice to have like a file for each sort of matrix block type, that kind of thing. And that goes with our CSS as well, right? Like, just really breaking down everything into components that we can omit.
Yeah, I literally will like start a new project and pick and choose which blocks to put in it based on what the client needs, and then it's just I make the SAS file match that, and then I'm only building what I need, only half what I need, and I'm not overcomplicating things. But like how many different content fields types would you need for a call out? That's pretty much the same field most of the time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the one thing that I think we need to keep in mind here is that the tools that we use to prototype and design the site are not necessarily going to be the tools that we use to actually develop and deploy the site, right? For exactly what we've discussed here, whether it's going to overwhelm the client or whether it's not going to be performant. And I mean, it would be really awesome if there was a way to kind of unify all of this and have it meet all of those target goals, but it's really, really difficult to do that. I mean, you really basically are kind of building your own private Wix, you know what I mean? Whereas if what you're using it for is a prototyping tool, well, you can spend a lot less time developing this thing because it's just for you to use to generate stuff,
Yeah, you could potentially even have your prototyping craft site output a third thing on top of the design.
Oh, yeah, the JSON file for
architecture. Is the styles and guides and stuff you need to carry over to the real site.
Yeah, my prototype has Prism running with code samples and stuff in it that I would never give over to a client.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, right? You would design the site in whatever tools your designer likes, like Illustrator maybe, and then you would click a button and you would have a website, right? But unfortunately, the reality isn't even close to that, and some of these kind of interstitial tools are needed to do it. But I just think it's important to keep in mind that at least currently, the tools that I'm using to design and prototype these things are not the way that I am actually deploying it for clients. I wish it was simpler, but it's not.
Yeah, I think there is. Yeah, I mean, the nice thing with some of these plugins and tools, like the Neo thing in particular, that's nice, is that it uses existing fields instead of you're not like making special fields within it, and so it does become a little easier to take what you've got and kind of start pulling stuff out of it and bringing it down a bit, which is nice. So
what I mean
still
is
progressively do that, but
well, what I mean is the tools that you mentioned that you already do this, but that really cool layout builder that you were showing us, you're never going to give that to a client, right? You're going to get the design right, and then you're going to pull out the pieces you need from the Neo field so that when they go in there to actually edit it, they aren't like, oh my God. I don't know what.
Well, if you did have field permissions, you could do that, where you could just say, okay, here it is. I'm going to turn all this off. They don't see any of this. But until they fix that, you're right. You are having to have an A and a B for that.
Sometimes we do have clients that they're a great graphic designer, and they, you can kind of let them play with that a little bit, and so there is some level, we do have clients that we do give that kind of flexibility to, but they know what they're doing, right? They're very comfortable doing that, and so especially if they are maybe an editorial, like a magazine or something like that, where you do have people that are, they know layout. It especially helps if they do understand how the web works and CSS works. That's a critical part, knowing how are things going to break, and if something breaks, why is it breaking? Because it will break. So
Do you have any?
You are far more trusting than I am.
Do you have any
More trusting.
best practices you'd like to share with us? I'll give one. One thing I do is I don't let clients delete images until they ask me that they need to delete images, because every time I've had the client where they could delete assets, what would happen would be they would go delete assets and then half their entries would be broken. I would have to go back and fix them. So I will turn off their ability to delete assets until they actually ask for it. So are there things like that that you can share or recommend related to what you do?
Yeah, totally. I agree. I'm very careful about permissions and things like that. I try to we try to set up the client with some sort of workflow, publishing workflow. So they have like one stakeholder that is, they have the most permissions. Even then, it's not all the permissions or anything like that, but they might have the ability to like publish new entries, that kind of thing. Like I love the way Craft has like those controls. Like you can set people so they can only like edit their own things or publish their own things, or maybe they can't publish.
Yeah,
that kind of stuff is helpful. So
I can give you a Slack story from someone who came in there needing some help. It's like that, but even worse. And this is why you want to be very careful with permissions, like you said you are, Travis, because. And a lot of times I don't even let my clients have an admin account, and if they're under a maintenance contract. If I think it's the kind of person or the kind of client that, they shouldn't have that chainsaw. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But no, someone came in there and half of their entries were gone, and what happened was someone quit, someone left the company, so they deleted that user from Craft, which then deleted all of the content that they then posted up there. So yeah, I mean, you got to be real careful with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Guess they didn't use the transfer content feature.
I guess not. I mean, it must have popped up and they just, clicked away and didn't even pay any attention to it, and boom, gone.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nightly backups are always a good thing.
Right. So Travis, one question looking forward. Where's the next step? What can't you do in an environment like this that you'd love to be able to do?
For me, it's not even so much what can't I do. It's like I'm actually surprised at what we've made able to do at this point with this. Right now it's really trying to refine that into something that's a little, it's kind of making it so it's easier on a UI perspective, especially on that art direction part of it, and also how do we control things, lock it down in a way. Also, there's other issues that I'm concerned about, but don't really have the know-how of how to really evaluate it and optimize it, is things like performance, right? Everything's cached, and it seems we can get it loading pretty quickly, but also that's a huge amount of database hits and things like that we're dealing with, right? And so, a lot of that is a level of architecture that I'm not even sure of, and right now it's probably a mess to look at on that end of it for some of this stuff. So having a better understanding of how we can maybe apply these concepts in a more maybe natural built-in sense that's not really pushing the limits of what you should be able to do with these fields, that kind of thing, and just sort of working with other plugin developers maybe to figure out how we can actually make plugins that sort of work with this on a more streamlined way. That's where I'd like to go next.
Travis, if you need anybody to help with performance, I know a guy.
Yeah, awesome. Yes.
He's going to write a plugin that automatically makes everything eager load without any.
Automatically detects the environment.
Right.
Running.
No,
Right.
He will not. He's not. He's not going to code himself out of a job. Give me a break.
Love
That's
it.
the goal. That's the job description of every job to me. Try to remove the need for yourself.
How are you handling responsive design with this? Because
I
that's been one of the issues I've run into. Because once you start adding like breakpoints into this, then all of a sudden you're like 2 orders of complexity higher for the coding and then the client to manage.
Yeah, that is actually one of the next things that we want to tackle next. Because right now this is like it's very very stream. We've got the CSS for it built out in our sort of on the front end of this, so it works
Right.
really great that way. But without adding a separate set of fields for like small things, medium things, large things. Right now it's just one. It's basically like mobile, and then it gets to like tablet-ish
Right.
size, and then
Right.
those ones snap in. And then we've got some functional classes that we can pop in. Like there's a little custom class text field on every element that we can pop in there if it does need to change. That
I
comes in
almost
handy
wish
from
they
time
would
to
kind of
time.
figure out a way to like make it sort of like localization, where you're
Yeah.
dealing with different devices, you know, instead of
Yeah.
French or German or Swahili, these are my device widths.
Yeah, I mean, it might be like maybe it's a way of like maybe it requires an abstraction of the layout stuff away from the content stuff, but it still references those blocks, and then you can, I don't
Yeah,
know, I don't
source
know. There's
ordering.
probably different ways you could do this, but yeah, it's kind of fun. For me, this is really the way I had always sort of envisioned designing things on the web from designing editorially in the past, right? Like we would have our InDesign file with different masters in it, and the all the styles were already set for text and things like that. And it's just like we just assemble everything using our constraints to the
Right.
global style. And then
Right.
once we have that, we can start like playing around and tweaking for maybe we have an article with 10 images in it. How can we? What are the different ways we can experiment with that? Or maybe it's just like we just want type to be huge on this thing. How can we do that? So
How,
it's fun. Yeah.
how are you folks approaching we've talked about the modular content, kind of breaking everything into these blocks, and then even having style sheets specific to a block. Now, there's certain styles that are specific to a block and other styles like the font you're using that aren't specific to a block at all.
Right.
Where are you drawing the line between what's a component that is packaged like that, a block with its specific styles, versus what is site level design and branding stuff that you need consistent to be successful there?
We typically, it's very much everything is global styles, and we'll have like a global style for like the call out thing or like forms or whatever. They're really general, and typically anything that we add according to an entry is the only CSS that's in line on that page is stuff that sits on top of that system. So it's like very much that art direction field, and then that's about it. I think the only other thing
Right.
is sometimes we'll have like a custom background color where it's just the color palette background, and that just adds like a background color inline class on that block. That's really it. But
What I do, Ben, is I'll have every block is named after its own type, so that way the include loop automatically includes it based on type. And I name the twig file the same, and then in every block, the type also gets written into the div that surrounds the block. So in my styles, I'll literally have the block name as a class on the div. And then in that style sheet, on that class, I'll have anything that needs to override any particular style related to that block in the SAS file, so that it only occurs on the block itself and not necessarily across the site. So if I have like a H2 and a call out, it gets the H2 call out style that's associated with the name of the block. and that way I can keep everything straight and separate, and I can find the stuff in the code where I need to find it, and I don't end up making styles for my blocks that override something somewhere else in the navigation, and I can't figure out what's happening. So I just sort of put that container of the block type around everything.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to do that. I like that. We'll do things like very similar with, like, especially with our fonts. Like, that's one thing that's pretty new with us is, like, I want to be able to have access to, like, the full range of 2 fonts, but that's crazy to load all that over the entire site. So we'll have, like, a little conditional in the art direction field where it's like, if you've called this the serif font with this particular weight, it'll add, like, the font embed just for that in that situation, which helps kind of keep that locked down and a little more optimized for things too. That's been a helpful thing. Yeah, it's fun. Like, it's really about trying to think systematically from the CSS level, and then trying to figure out how that fits with the twig level.
But this is my 3rd Google map on the page, and how do I call just the script on that one Google map?
I just needs one marker on it, and then it'll link them to another site.
I've got collisions in my JavaScript.
Yeah, exactly. It's art. Yeah.
Every block will have the ID of the block and as the ID. So then when you're calling the JavaScript, like, I'll have the JavaScript and the sometimes the CSS twig tags that get included in the head and foot of the craft. That way the scripts actually get embedded with the block and then are shot into the main template.
Interesting.
See what I mean? That way, if you have like a slider or some sort of weird thing, the JavaScript required to run it is in the block itself, and then gets included in the script tag.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. Very cool. I love this, you guys. Yeah.
You got. I'm thinking out loud here. If you're doing that with scripts, you got to be sure that you're loading jQuery or whatever at the top of the page. If you're
jQuery is in the main template that gets extended, right?
Okay.
And then the any script that's called like that, the ID of the block is the identifier in the jQuery as to what that script is. So I don't have, like, call out a generic class for like, say, slider, and then I'm trying to tell slider to do something. I've got 6 different sliders. It'll be like slider hyphen the ID of the block, and then that way the scripts only hit that one element as it's needed on the page. And
I feel obligated to interject here. What I consider a better way to do it is use require.js, and then anywhere that you need that script, you just say require, and then the name of the thing, and then the code inside that is not executed until that script is actually loaded. So then you don't worry about dependencies. You don't worry about, when was this script loaded? Did I inline it? None of that stuff. It just handles the requirements for you, and it works very, very naturally with the modularized approach that you guys are using, using blocks to design content, because you can just have a block can say, I need this.
But keep in mind that a lot of times the scripts will define, like, stuff that's being used in the block also. So it's not just the script that makes the block happen. It might be the parameters in the block that are passed to the script.
Sure. Yeah. All I'm saying is that for to handle that kind of dependency issue, where you have to worry about, is this JavaScript around? Something like require.js is really, it'll save you a ton of time.
Yeah, that really addresses the point I was trying to bring up there too. Is like, the more you're requiring big JavaScript files at the top of your page, the more you're damaging your page load and stuff if you're including scripts like that. So
yeah, you're going to get horrible performance, especially on mobile, if you are doing that.
Great.
That's cool.
Are there any final questions for anybody here? All right, well, thank you for coming out, everybody, and thank you especially to Travis for pulling together the demo of what you're working on there. It's a lot of cool stuff.
Thanks a lot, guys. Yeah, it's all open source and everything like that. Like if you go to livewires.io, like that, it links to the GitHub pages and you can scope around. Let me know how to improve it because it needs it, and it's fun to play around with. I also, if you go to demo.livewires.com, there's like if you use I'll tweet this or something like that. You can
I'll add
log
it
in
to the
with
show notes.
password and the username's admin and the password's password. It resets the database every night, but please don't make me regret making this public. But you can go in and like play around in the CMS there and make a page and stuff like that. So you better not. But yeah, so have a look. Let me know. I'd love to hear feedback on it. Like it's just really fun to experiment with this stuff anyway and see how far we can push it and break it and all that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Well, and anybody who was tempted by the Neo field, next week we have Benjamin Fleming and Josh Crawford joining us. The time next week will actually be later in the 6 p.m. Pacific time and 9 p.m. East Coast time, so might shift who's available to join in the U.S. time zone, but we're heading over to Australia so that these gentlemen who have been building some pretty interesting fields that a lot of people are using in these interesting ways, Super Table and Neo, can chat with us about how those fields, how people are using those fields and such. So join us for that next week, and thanks for coming out. This is Straight Up Hangouts. We're here weekly. My name is Ben Prusick from Braille Strength Design, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
See you later.